I'm going to give you 5 reasons why you should not read the Game of Thrones series by George R.R. Martin. Hello mortals, I am the goddess who created the text world of Lusternia, and I have become a booktuber. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Or don't, but do. Before the HBO series even aired, I remember recommending the Game of Thrones to several of my friends. I thought it was an awesome epic fantasy and did things I've never seen before in other epic fantasies, but some people just weren't able to get into it. And some of that, I think, has to do with because it was unlike other epic fantasies that we're used to. So let's get right into it. The number 5 reason not to read the Game of Thrones is because it is a multiple viewpoint story. That means chapters can jump from the perspective of one character to another character. And sometimes, and this is a bigger deal, it jumps from one storyline to a different storyline. And I understand why this can be off-putting. I personally prefer a novel that sticks to one viewpoint and one storyline, but it is not an uncommon device in epic novels where the story is so expansive that it can't encompass one character's point of view. The danger is that you get so involved in one storyline that you really resent and become impatient when the storyline jumps to one that you might not be that interested in. 1 minute you're in King's Landing, caught up in court intrigue. And in the next chapter, you're on another freaking continent with a bunch of barbarians on horses. Arrgh, that's not what you signed up for. For me, I found all the storylines interesting, and I thought George R.R. Martin allowed us to stay long enough with one storyline before shifting to another. Now, I've read some books where I get whiplash from chapter to chapter, storyline to storyline, character to character. Even so, when you jump from Westeros to Essos to the Wall and back and so on, I get why some people found these a little frustrating to read. I get why some people may not appreciate the multiple viewpoint storyline. But this brings us to the number 4 reason not to read the books. There is no main character. Even other epics that have multiple viewpoints still have a main character, but not Game of Thrones. Hell, even Lord of the Rings, we know that Frodo is the main character, and all the subplots of the various members of the Fellowship are focused around supporting Frodo in his quest. At first, everything revolves around Ned Stark and his family. His friend Robert Baratheon is the king who needs Ned, so Ned chooses duty over family. He's thrown into a mystery of who killed his predecessor, the previous king's hand. He's a hard but likable character, and you kind of expect his honor to be his downfall, especially after King Robert dies. You think Ned is the main character, and when he's at his lowest, you expect him to be banished to the Wall because, hey, that's what any other writer would do, because this is a time for the main character to go on his redemption arc or his revenge arc. Everything has been set up and foreshadowed that disgraced lords are banished to the Wall. But that's not what happens here. George R.R. Martin has lulled you into a false sense of security because Ned Stark has his freaking head chopped off. Ugh. Then you move on to Ned's eldest son, Robb Stark, who raises an army to avenge his father. Once again, George R.R. Martin tricks you into thinking that Robb Stark must be the main character. And he keeps that going, that little charade going, into the third book, before Robb gets butchered in the infamous Red Wedding.
Let him go, or I will cut your wife's throat.
I'll find another.
Mother. The Lannisters send their regards.
At this point, we have to get creative in order to find a main character. You can get cute and say the Throne of Swords is the main character, and its character arc is whoever sits on the throne. But that's just a little too cute by half. The better argument is that the Stark family is the main character. After all, every Stark family member has a major role in the books, seeing some truly amazing character developments of the Stark children, at least the ones who survive. But there's just one issue with naming the Stark family as the main character, which brings us to the number 3 reason not to read the Game of Thrones. The last 2 books haven't been completed. How can we say the Stark family is the main character when we don't even know if they will survive the last 2 books? Now, don't count on the HBO series to inform you, because George R. R. Martin has said that the plot of the books is going to diverge from the plot of the HBO series. Let me tell you a little story. I wanted to read the Game of Thrones when it was first published in 1996. Because I like big, juicy fantasy epics. But I knew it was the first in a series, and I get annoyed when I have to wait a long time to read the next book in a series. I stayed my hand and didn't pick up the first book until the second book was published a couple years later, around 1998, The Clash of Kings. Now, I don't know why I got this in my little brain, but I had it in my mind that this was a trilogy. So I figured that I can read the first 2 books and I'll just have a little wait for the final book in the series. That did not turn out so well, as you know. This is a 7-book series, and 20 years later, the last 2 books still haven't been published, at least as of May 2019 when I'm filming this. You would think that I would have had learned my lesson after the Wheel of Time strung me out forever. And I have a lot to say on the Wheel of Time. If you want to know my opinion on the Wheel of Time series. If you're interested in that, say something in the comments because I have a lot I can talk about. Let's move on to reason number 2 not to read the Game of Thrones. You already know what happens because you've seen the HBO series. Everyone watching this video has seen the series, and if you haven't read the books yet, you probably aren't going to pick them up now. Why should you? Since you already know how bloody long the series is, and only 5 out of 7 books have been published, and you pretty much know the story. Like I said before, George R.R. Martin has said that the plot of the novel will diverge from the HBO series. And anyone who's read the series knows something is very different, starting with the fate of Catelyn Stark. But if you enjoyed the HBO series, why have it ruined by the plot in the books running in a different direction than what you were expecting? When I first heard HBO was doing the Game of Thrones, I could not believe they'd be stupid enough to take on a sprawling fantasy epic that didn't even have a bloody main character. I had absolutely every expectation that would be a big old fail. Or even if it was a decent series, that there wouldn't be an audience for HBO to finish the series. After all, I've known HBO to drop a series I've really been into. Carnival, anyone? I'm still pissed off that series was never completed. But for Game of Thrones, obviously, I could not have been more wrong. Not only did they do a decent job of following the novels, the series was just amazing. From the acting, to the storyline, to the special effects, everything fired on all cylinders. And I am so happy I was wrong because the series is a masterpiece. It's a classic. It's going to be a staple for decades, centuries to come. So if you've liked the HBO series, why not read the books? Okay, I'll tell you the number 1 reason not to read the Game of Thrones. Because it will ruin every other epic fantasy you read. It is such a good series that you'll constantly compare everything you read to the Game of Thrones. Is it as gritty as the Game of Thrones? Are the characters well drawn as the Game of Thrones? Is the world building as intense as the Game of Thrones? Now already in recently published books, you see phrases, the Jew Game of Thrones. And this is a real tagline of a book I've just read. Epic feminist fantasy, perfect for fans of Game of Thrones. What? What? Now remember, there is a reason that HBO chose Game of Thrones over all the other epic fantasies out there. It is raw. It is gritty. It is brutal. Brutal to its own characters and storylines. And the characters are complex and multi-dimensional, having shades of gray. And the world building is deep, from the White Walkers, to the Wall, to the supernatural powers, to the dragons, to the amazing history and backstories that don't weigh down the plot but lift it up. If you don't want to ruin every other epic fantasy you read, stay away from the Game of Thrones. And may all the books you read be blessed.